Follow innovator, guide, and path creator Sarita Patel on a journey into our communal stream of consciousness. Sarita Patel has advised billionaires, film luminaries, artists, tech executives, makers, and visionaries on doing the right thing for themselves, our communities, and our world. Follow along as Sarita discusses all subjects, topics, and controversial thoughts and ways of life that have seen and unseen effects on all of our lives. One thing is for sure, jump into the stream with Sarita and you're going to get wet, but come out refreshed. Welcome back to another episode of Sarita in the Stream with your host, Sarita Patel. Sarita, welcome back to your show.
Hi, Latham. It's nice to see you. It's been a while.
I have to explain that Sarita is on assignment in Chicago, USA right now, in the bitter cold of Chicago. And it leads us to one of our subjects. And that subject today is family or your close family. Sarita, why don't you take it away?
Well, it's you kind of feel like my family now. So it's been 2 weeks since I've seen you, and I feel like I'm missing my family. But
That's
as you
sweet of
know,
you to say. Thank you.
well, it's true.
Thank
It's
you.
true. Um, so yeah, I'm in Chicago, in a suburb, taking care of my mom for a month while my sister is taking a much needed break away from regular life. And I've been doing this for about 5 years now, where I come home and take care of my mom for a little over a month. And boy, oh boy, every single time changes. Watching our parents or anybody age is a part of life. And I just thought it would be really interesting to talk about care at a broad level. Because, it's a big deal for me to leave home, even though I don't even think twice about caring for my mom. I think I wish I just had more freedom to be able to do this. Like, that is the biggest conundrum for me every day. When I wake up with this anxiety that is like, I should be doing something else, not should be out of external pressure, but like literally, this is something that I can't afford to do. And I don't even know how people have gotten into that situation where we can't afford to take care of people.
So, you and I talked about earlier some issues that are going on around the world, and most notably in Japan and Italy right now. We're having abandoned villages all over and abandoned old people just basically left by their relatives in a very counterintuitive, especially culturally for both of those cultures. Um, there's so much to say about this, and it seems like it's getting worse, and generationally here maybe even as well.
Well, you brought up a good area, which is, Italy and Japan. I don't even know if people really realize or recognize. I mean, I call it an elder genocide that's happening when you think about Japan and Italy, where if you think about their marketing and advertising, we're always seeing um, material that show the youthfulness, the joyfulness, the wisdom that we get from elder Japanese and Italians, especially, Italian grandma, the Japanese elder who still make things out of wood block. I mean, they're so creative. The art that came out of Japan, not over a small amount of time in somebody's life, but one that went on for decades and decades. And sometimes some of the best work, creative work, came out of the elder Japanese culture. So I know I went off tangent, but it is shocking to me that right now the highest rates of elder abuse and neglect are really coming out of Japan and Italy. And so that begs the question, do we even know what's happening here in America? I don't think so. I think it's happening here, a neglect of the elders, which is just following suit with what's happening all over the world. So the question is not if it's happening, It's why it's happening, and it is happening.
It is certainly happening. And I think you're seeing this disconnect between generationally and the caring for the older people in our society, and how you go from being a baby, an infant that needs care, and then you go to becoming an old person, hopefully, should you be blessed with a long life. And sometimes you need care. And in between, there's those times when you have to have someone who helps you because you can't help yourself in many instances.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we just focus on, my family, for example, I mean, I'm first generation. My parents were born in India. And so I was raised with an inherent caring and sharing philosophy. I don't think I could even have said when I was growing up that I was actually learning that. It was just integrated in our development as human beings. So, um, my grandparents came to visit the United States, I think 3 times, and it was like the biggest, it was the biggest event of our life. The fact that my parents, after decades of not seeing their parents, got to see them. And I do remember one distinct time in life. I think I was a teenager, maybe 16 years old. And my grandfather, who was kind of known as the wise elder in our village in India, he was a businessman, but he was also the community leader. And so what that meant was the community leader was responsible. He was basically the buck stopped there. So if the village thrived, it had a lot to do with his leadership. And if the village was suffering, then it had a lot to do with his leadership or his ability to pivot and change, to adapt to the changes. It's not a role for the faint of heart.
You got a lot of people looking at you.
Got a lot of people looking at you and depending on you and helping you. If it's run well, then, you know, it's seamless. So just kind of going back to my childhood, um, my parents were the first people in their village to actually be in the United States. And their original goal was to come here to get educated so that when they went back to India, they would actually have an academic stamp behind their name, which gave them a little bit more credibility in India, which was moving towards more, they were moving toward more validation in an education accreditation. How's that? So,
Yeah.
It's normal. And so the plan was for them to go back to India and help run the business and take the torch of when my grandparents would be older and no longer able to take care of the village. That didn't happen, and that's for another episode. I mean, they remained in the United States because I was born. And then life goes on. It's a very typical immigrant story. But um, that doesn't disregard the fact that my parents brought this caring attitude to every single thing that they did. So, for example, if there was a relative coming to the United States to go to school or to find a new way, then they would pretty much live in our house for as long as it took for them to get on their feet and be able to support themselves. For some people, that took a year. For some people, it took 5 years. There was no measurement. It was kind of like you watch and wait until that person is ready to go off on their own. And in that meanwhile, they have a supportive environment. So I literally lived my life, my youth, always having a different relative or friend of the family live in our house, which meant that I never had my own bedroom. Our first house was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in Park Forest, Illinois. And I don't even remember being crowded in that house, quite honestly, because there was so much love and support. it's not that I was blind to the fact that people had more space. I think I'm bringing it up because you would think that the space would have been a big deal in terms of our comfort level, but it actually wasn't.
Was your grandmother and grandfather with you then? Not.
No, my grandmother and grandfather didn't come to visit us until they stayed in India. So they basically helped move people who showed that they had the sense of responsibility and motivation to actually go to America and add value um, to humanity by going to America. So going to America wasn't a trip to go get rich. It was a trip to go see another part of the world and bring back whatever made sense in terms of advancement to a village.
Bringing back information, bringing back um, qualities that they thought would enhance the village,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah.
Well, getting back to the story about the older people, okay? Let's
Mhm.
wind back to that.
Okay.
And getting back to there's these terms of endearment for both in Italy, the nonna, the
Mhm.
nonna is the grandma,
Mhm.
and in Japan it's obasan. That's the word for it. And oji-san is old granddad. And these things are, you know, they're entrenched. These names are entrenched because they mean something. When you say Oji-san, you literally are meaning the wise old person. Okay.
Mhm.
And Obasan is the person who nurtures the family. So now we're at this point where you've got technology luring all of the young people in Italy, all of the young people in many countries, including Japan and China. China's having the same problem. And
Mhm.
they're getting lured to the city and abandoning these traditional villages. And this is an unraveling of the fabric of society, the family, you know. And it's also Japan is different in terms of it's a complete monoculture, but Italy, and few people know this or recognize this, Italy wasn't even a country until about 150 years ago. The thing we recognize as Italy now.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was small principalities and then woven together as Italy later. Um, but they share something culturally, and it seems to me that all these things are being lost in this evacuation of the countryside and the dollar or €1 houses you see advertised everywhere. And you see it on YouTube all the time. Now you see all these Japanese houses in the middle of nowhere that look amazing. They're being sold by the council in the cities for nothing.
Mhm.
And has to have a long-term detrimental effect to society.
Mhm.
It's a really interesting thing. Within the village structure of where you came from, what was the relationship to the old people as they got older and perhaps more infirm?
So in our village, which is in the state of Gujarat, which is the largest state, I don't know if many people know that there are many, many states in India. So just like we have the United States, India is the same thing. It has many states and all the states operate, independently. So we're from Gujarat. In our village, the respect and honor towards the elders is so palatable that you just can't help but revere that order. So for example, it's a very common custom when you greet an elderly person, to bow down and put your hands on their feet, because you're basically blessing the ground that they walk on, because you know how many steps and how much they did just to have your place here in the world of some sort of comfort or safety. So uh, they have great honor. I have never seen anything in my experience of India that has been anything but that. Um, I do remember one small thing where there was one Indian fellow who was probably in his 80s and he was blind and a bit of um, he didn't have use of all of his limbs. I think, he had been in an accident or something. So he was pretty much uh, destined to sit and do things with his hands, but he wasn't mobile. Sorry, I'm not saying this very well. But so he lived in a section of the village that wasn't in the village proper, but was a little bit on the outskirts. And he was on, and I said to my dad, I said, why does he live all the way out there? And he said, well, it's really not all the way out there. It's a little bit closer to the forest and to the river. And sometimes, he gets really frustrated because he can't walk anymore. And so when he gets frustrated, he might have a reaction like a cry or a scream. And so it's easier for him to have those outbursts out there where it doesn't scare the young people and things. But, everybody knows that. And so he's out there because he prefers to be in solitude, but everybody visits him. Somebody always brings him tea in the morning. It's just a part of the natural daily routine for people. They trade off. But that's an example of somebody who might not fit into the regular day-to-day operations of a village, but they're not forgotten. They're not outed from the village. They are taken care of, even though, their outwardly contribution might not be as valuable as it was. And if you're growing up in a place, and this is something that parallels to the United States, if you're no longer contributing to society, then you kind of have to find a different contribution in order to still have value. I think that's the pause where I think it's really easy to just say, oh, it's an old tennis shoe. Let's just throw it away. I think throwing away older people has just become a non-thought. That people, it's easier to throw people away, whether it's putting them in a nursing home or a mental institution or letting them live by themselves. I don't know. I mean, there's many,
Well,
many options.
let
It's
me ask you a question because we have had this conversation about when I informed you about the villages in Florida. Remember, we were talking, and
Yeah.
you're like, "What's the villages?" And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Well, it's a great, huge, it's the most massive retirement community in the world, maybe." And it kind of got me thinking about, is it where I live here? I'm starting to see, and I'm 60, and I'm starting to see not my usefulness go away, but my interaction with the community going a different direction because I don't have kids in school anymore.
Hmm.
I don't participate in all those things because I did it,
Hmm.
20 years of that I did it. And so I'm starting to feel like, do I need to go somewhere else? But at the same time, I'm like, no, this is a great place.
Hmm.
It's one of the best places. But I think a lot of people, when they start to feel like they're not, especially if they don't have kids, right?
Hmm.
You don't have you don't have connection to the community. What do you do? Well, in this country, it seems like you go to places that cater to retirees, kind of thing. Or now, due to the economics, go to Mexico, where
Yeah.
they, you know, honor their elderly more than here. I think this is probably a good time to take a break and tell about our new sponsor. And this is going to be very crinkly for people for a second because I'm going to hold this up to the camera. It's Just One
Wow.
Organics, and this is their blackberry. And I'm trying not to crinkle it too much, and it's backward. But Just One Organics is an amazing process that a fellow up in Oregon, David, what's his last name again?
David Rose.
David Rose, an amazing guy. I talked to him yesterday on the phone. I'm embarrassed that I don't remember his name, but it's just he took over a drying facility in Klamath Falls, Oregon. He gets cast away, unloved fruit and vegetables and changes how you treat them. He purees them in some miracle fashion, flattens them out, and then dries them in a very fast fashion and is able to package them so that you can use them in your culinary or drink adventures every day. And I'll just read you something briefly. Just One Organic celebrates organic farmers as key to our survival. Our well being depends on nutrients created by soil microbes that come to us through organic fruits and vegetables. Gentle drying intensifies flavor, fragrance, and color you can enjoy anytime. And that kind of says it all. I mean, an amazing thing. They have so many different things you can buy, from bananas to apricots to kale to I don't even know how many, probably 40 or 50 more things. And we are actively working with Just One Organics to spread the word. And if you're looking for something interesting, different, and you live perhaps in a food desert or a place where you cannot get blackberries in the middle of winter, why don't you give Just One Organics a try? And I will post online how to get in touch with them. And let's see if you can go out and buy some great stuff from Just One Organics. Um, so now we're back to the subject. I mean, it's you were caring for your mom, and it's we all have parents that are suffering. My wife's mother-in-law just died from complications due to dementia. My father has his own illness right now that he's coping with. Your mother as well. And far from, I mean, my father doesn't live down here, but we stay in touch daily on the phone, and it gets tough. And I got to tell a lot of people who are younger, perhaps listening to this, it's worth it. You have to do what you have to do to care for the people who loved you at one point when you were small and perhaps very cute but unlovable at times, right?
Well, I mean, back in the old day when, people used to say it was like a duty, an unnecessary duty or burden. I think that's a part of a narrative that got driven into our psyche to, you know, make us really think that our independent lives are so much more important than the interconnectedness of the people who took care of us. I just think it's gotten completely overblown, just like everything in this me culture, right? So whether you want to call it a burden, it is a burden now because people just don't live as close to their family members as they used to. We have literally been migrated to go wherever the job takes us. And so that's literally split us apart in many ways. Is it great? Yeah, in some ways it's fantastic that we get to see parts of the world that we may not have ever seen if we didn't leave Kansas. But there is something when you look at ancient history and families tribed together for hundreds, if not thousands of years, there was a technology and um, a purpose in that. And it was for human survival. So just going back to what you're talking about right now in terms of our population is less, our connection with our family members is less, all that's going to do is put more pressure on each individual to support themselves.
Yeah, and I also think it's important that the images depicted in the media to us, these hallmark, especially around the holidays, right? These
Yeah.
hallmark images of joy around the family. We all know that's just, that's like 5% of the time, right? Maybe. But the reality is you've got, you know, you've got an audience that will appreciate your sarcasm sometimes, or tell you to F off, or shut up, go to your room, stop drinking so much. You're not making sense anymore. All sorts of stuff. But that's your family, right? Who,
Yeah.
in other words, you just get thrown out of a bar, right? But your family can tolerate that in many respects. And it's not all that with all families. I know a lot of families that are not very copacetic at all. But I think you've got the ability or the potential to have a meaningful, fulfilling relationship with your family, old or young. I mean, and I respect the fact that when you're young, you require care. When you're old, you require care.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody has to do it. And you don't want some nameless, faceless, non-interested party doing it. It's not fair.
No, well, you don't. And it's not fair to anybody because, again, I mean, this is a topic that I think needs to be flushed out more, right? Not avoided. Because there's the other thing that family does is family triggers us like no other unit. So it's the members of our family that will trigger us because we grow up with them and we learn, a lot of negative things, positive things in how we were socialized. So to be in
I
a,
actually detected a little bit of a wince when you said that your family triggers you because I know you've got sisters.
I do. I mean, my
Yeah,
poor dad had 4 daughters and a wife.
that's a lot of estrogen. A
That's a
lot of
lot.
estrogen in
Yeah.
that house.
Yeah. He went bald pretty darn early. But I will say, yeah, so I have 3 siblings. One of my youngest sibling passed away in 1992. Um, but yeah, I mean, the three of us now trigger each other all the time. We're just more mindful of the fact that we have that ability, right? So
Oh yeah.
it went from, fighting, fighting, fighting to avoiding to now a more mature level where we actually see that addressing those triggers can actually help us heal so that we can be better human beings for ourselves and for the people around us.
Oh yeah. My brother and I quarrel all the time, and my sister and I do too. But we always come back to a good baseline, that you mutual respect and the fact that you live on this planet together and you're as close as anything can be, and you can't give that up. I am blessed with a large family. I think you are too.
Yeah.
And not just direct family, but extended cousins, and we see each other all the time, and it's really nice. Um, but in sense of community, I think, and again, going back to this village thing and them being abandoned, that's a problem when your community leaves you, especially for older people.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not just societal consequences, it's human consequences. Because what we're losing from those elders in Italy and Japan, let's just use those two as examples because we could definitely talk about it in America too. But what we're losing is, when you get to that stage in your life, you're not supposed to be working uber hard. You're not supposed to be lifting things up. You're literally moving into that transitional phase of wisdom, right? And if we lose, this is a circle. Humans follow the circle of life, the cycle of life. So if we are losing that wisdom for 2 generations, the really young ones and the ones in the middle, like us, who need that wisdom, right? Who are at a stage in our life where we're moving into a more humanitarian cycle. And what better place to find it but from that demographic that's ready to share that? That is that's the crime in all of this. So why it's happening, I don't know, except that I do know that people with wisdom make different choices and decisions. It's not about an independent result. It literally includes others.
Yeah, the conversation we had the other day about it was kind of I was talking about the older people in this country um, who continue to hold on to their with a dying grasp onto their power in the
Mm,
U.S. government
mhm.
and their age and how old these people are, and how I said, maybe it's time for younger people to really take over. I mean, this has just gotten ridiculous. We've got Nancy Pelosi, we've got Joe Biden, we got Trump, we got all these guys. They're all post 77. Um, it's like I think this has maybe this is interconnected. That maybe young people are feeling so like disaffected and somewhat betrayed by the older people because they're not parents, not normies, but people who were put in places of power in all of our governments worldwide. It seems like there's older people. There's a point at which, wisdom is great.
Mhm,
60 to maybe 75. That's a great window. Those are wise people.
mhm.
Hey, I'm going to put myself in that group now. Um, but after that, maybe calm down a little. Just let younger people take it over, right? And maybe younger people are feeling so disaffected and underrepresented, they feel maybe a draw to urban centers to maybe that makes them feel like they can get control back. I don't know. It's a wild theory.
I think it's no, I don't think it's a wild theory. I think it's another like marketing plan. And I'm saying marketing plan because these things do take quite a bit of marketing and longevity study. Like how long is this plan going to work and how can we get people to move into these areas? It's a manufactured migration technique. But what you talk about with the power in terms of that power structure that does rule countries right now, it does absolutely. um that's kind of like a those people got to those places of power because they literally had the personality, the motivation, and the reward to get to the top of a financial success game. Okay, so now they're there, right? So that's almost their nostalgia. That's all they have to fall back on. That is their wisdom. That is their world. And so what you're talking about is I almost feel like it's like we can give, the young people can give those folks the permission to let it go.
Well said. But in the case of so many people that we see on a daily basis in our Congress, our Senate, and our upper levels of government, I don't think they want to let go, even if they're given permission to let go. And it's sad because I would like to see 45-year-old men and women running this country. That's what needs to happen because they're in the popular zeitgeist, right?
Mhm.
They're there right now. The person who's 75 years old, 85 years old, well, they were born in 1938 to 1944, right? In that group. A world war was here. There was fear everyone hurts daily. There was, and that gets imbued to children, especially when their parents are going off to war, never know if they're going to come back. And this whole way of thinking, that has changed.
Mhm.
45-year-olds now, today, they were born, what year is that? 1975? Is that right?
Mhm.
No, 80.
80.
1980.
Yeah.
Well, shit, I was 16, right?
Right.
You know, so that doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Well, that's because it doesn't make sense. And if you think about um, Kennedy, I think he was 45 when he was president. They said that he was the youngest
I think
president,
you're right.
right?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at that situation, they made a big deal about how he was the youngest, how he's the youngest. Well, he happened to be the youngest baby, but it shouldn't really, he's at the prime age to have enough behind him and enough ahead of him and enough of that youth energy, which is right there at that age. That is the age where you are in a role of um, you know, of contributing in a great, I mean, that's the perfect age. I don't care how you slice it and dice it.
Yeah.
So, what I think you're talking about is something else, which I'm sure you've heard about these 80-year-olds. And again, I'm not knocking age. We're just talking about breaking up the life cycle of our life. Say we're lucky enough to go to 100 and we're looking at it like a scale, then of course that 70 to 80 would be, they're not in the game anymore. So I would actually qualify and quantify the people who are running at that age as being elder abused because they are not in any type of position to be making the decisions they're running. And I think we're pretty much seeing it. They're not actually making decisions. They are just the talking head for people in the back making decisions. So I personally think it's elder abuse, and that's been
Yeah.
perpetuated.
And it's funny because we're running in a circle here kind of on this conversation because I think if the older people in governments around the world, if they would relinquish the control, then we could respect them for doing that,
Mhm.
right? and respect the fact that they knew enough to step down at the right time to let the younger people really have a role in how the world goes, right? That would, and I think that would bring back the respect. And I think, I don't know if it would change the evacuation of villages, right? I don't know if that's the answer, but maybe it's one of the answers. Maybe it's having a place for people in age. I quote my grandmother at 101 years old. She said to me, and she lived to 104. She said, "You don't want to live to 101." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "My skin hurts, and everyone you know is dead, including one of my daughters." Very, very sad, touching moment for even my grandma, who's pretty hard.
Mm.
Um, but it's true. But that gap between 70 and 100, just, I think you should just try to either contribute in a way that is helpful, like charities and things like that, or schools or libraries. And God bless the ladies here in our town. You know, they're always down there at the booksellers selling the books that are in the used bookshop and stuff like that. They run the garden centers. I mean, it's truly a cool thing. Um, but we could respect the elders again if they just got out of trying to hold on to the power. I mean, it's just, I don't know. This is another conversation. I think we need to have another podcast about this one.
Well, it is, but I am going to say one thing about, let's just take Japan and Italy. I think that you could ask the question, are these places being cleaned out of the elderly because the elders have knowledge about how the natural ways of things work in those geographic locations? And so that's the same thing as Hawaii. You've got these people who are just so loyal and dedicated to the land because they have a different relationship to it than just land that you mow and blow. It's not. It's a living thing that they are a part of. I do think that, Italy and Japan are two great examples of really honoring the land. And what better way to make way for high rises and roads and things that are less natural than to get rid of the people who know.
And to get the villages and the land emptied.
Get it emptied. We're in a land grab
Yeah, globally. It's not
globally.
just those places, it's everywhere.
Right.
As is evidenced by what we're seeing down in Pacific Palisades. You
Yeah.
know,
Yep. We are.
I hate to timestamp this thing, but we're right at the tail end of that. Hopefully, we're at the tail end of that. And it's yeah, the land grab is real, and it's like if you force the elders off the land, and especially people who saw, you got to remember, like old Italian people, they didn't just see World War II. They saw their neighbors in Spain, Spanish Revolution. They saw uh, Franco and his reign of terror. I mean, Mussolini. They, all these terrible things that happened with these dictators. And I, I mean, I hate to even say it, but I went to Spain in 1985 or six, my first time.
Hmm.
I didn't really realize it had only been open for tourists for like 7 years. That's it. It had been under totalitarian control for so long. And look at our world now. You can go anywhere pretty much you want. You can do anything you want. But not too long ago, so many places were off limits. Yeah.
Right.
And maybe that's what the old people remember. These times, you know.
Well, for sure. I mean, I'm gonna talk to, I mean, that's part of being home right now, in the quiet. There's not a lot going on here. I'm fixing a lot of things. I'm cooking a lot, just really basic. So it's just nice to be very slowed down even further. But my mom every day tells me a different story about some time in the village where, the the people who wanted progress go for the lands that are pristine. And,
Mm.
my mom has these behaviors that one might look at as odd, but they really come from an ingrained survival mechanism. And even though people say, well, you don't need to do that, we're not in survival mode anymore. We kind of are.
You
It's
could be in
just
a moment's notice.
in a moment's notice. So there's nothing wrong with being in survival. It's the same thing as being preventative with our health, with our businesses. If we stopped and took the time to look at the train wrecks and opportunities, I think we would be much better off.
Yeah, I think this is just part one of many episodes on this subject. I think we're going to have, just because there's so much to be said. And I want to see, we're working, Sarita and I in Madmana Studios, we're working on some projects about soil. We're working on food, like Just One Organics. We're working on a farmer initiative. We're working on another initiative called Project Terroir, because there is another way. And I never even thought in my life I would be saying this. I really didn't. Because I wasn't blind to stuff, but I was just coasting along. And now I realize I see the egg industry, the milk industry, the poultry industry, the meat industry. All of these industries are consolidating about around 3 to 4 big players in the United States. If you think, as a listener or viewer, that this is a good thing, you really need to step back and start thinking about it. I don't know about you and your neighborhood, but eggs are $10 a dozen here. They're going up if you can find them. For 2 weeks, we weren't able to find eggs. That is a problem. And it's indicative of stuff that shows our food supply system is in disarray right now. And having monopolies control those systems is a mistake. And a mistake for children and our elderly, because we're not doing what's right.
Well, and it's not even, I like how you're right. And how we wake up to these realities is, it's not a judgment. It's just that we have to wake up to it because it's not going away. It's just getting stronger. And, I don't mean to correct you, but it's more than a mistake. It's an incorrect, natural flow of how we go. I mean, the fact that food, which was supposed to be free and grown off this planet, has become such a profit center.
It's a commodity now.
It's a commodity. It's just another indication of how we've gotten so out of balance in our pursuit of money and power that, that the majority of people on the planet actually can't get food now. Just because we get food in Marin County, and that's getting harder and harder, right? We are getting pickier and pickier about the food in our sandwiches. But sorry, but it's just the fact that the majority of people on the planet can't get good food. That's a problem.
That is a problem.
We
And
should get
that's
the statistics on how much money went to feeding the poor over the past 50 years, because it's growing. It hasn't diminished. It's growing.
that's going to be a definite subject for another Sarita in the Stream coming up for sure. Well, in parting, I just want to say, great conversation as usual with you. And if you do have an elderly person you're caring for, God bless you. If it's hard on certain days, go take a walk and breathe it out. I did see your mom scooting past you a couple of times there in the doorway. So, Sarita, thanks, and try to stay warm in Chicago, and we'll see you next time here on Sarita in the Stream.
Next time, call in.
Okay.
We have to have people call in and talk about this.
Well, we can do that when you're back. It's a lot easier to do it
Ah,
in studio, because we've got the setup now to do that. But we do encourage you. We will be doing some Facebook and Instagram lives for people who want to talk about these interesting and very tangential subjects. And we invite you to call in, because the more we talk about it, the more that positive energy goes into the atmosphere, and people start to talk about these things and make them real. So, Sarita, thanks again.
thank you, Latham. We'll see you next time.
Okay, say hi to your mom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Says hello.
Hi, Mom. You've been listening to Sarita in the Stream. For more information, or if you'd like to appear on the show, contact us at latham@madmanastudios.com. That's LATHAM at madmana, MADMANA studios.com. This program has been a recording by Madmana Studios. All rights reserved. Copyright 2024.